the conduct of Mr. Penny, along with his history, along with his training, and the suggestion that Mr. Neely was threatening to people, that all can make it more difficult for a jury to reach a decision.
If you don't mind, for our viewers, just to sort of break it down in simple terms, the difference between those two charges, the manslaughter in the second degree versus criminally negligent homicide. We know wasn't one the maximum prison sentence 15 years. Now this one would have been 4 years had he been found guilty. So a big disparity there. But what's the difference in what prosecutors had to prove between those two charges?
Well, it's looking at the mindset of Mr. Penny. And so for the manslaughter, you would have had to have basically shown that he was reckless, that he really knew or should have known that his conduct was going to cause serious injury or, in fact, the death of Mr. Neely. For the other, it shows that he's negligent, but again, it goes beyond mere negligence for like a car accident or something in a civil arena. And you'd be looking at negligence that rose to such a level that a reasonable person would have known better than to engage in that conduct. So the question really now for a jury in particular is, did holding Mr. Neely in that chokehold for that length of time, which sounds like not a lot of time to us, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, we can debate that, even 2 or 3 minutes, but ultimately really is a long time if you actually stop your clock and listen and wait during a period of 3 or 4 minutes, whether that was unreasonable and whether that was likely to cause his death.
Right.
And that's the issue.
Okay. Speaking in a more broad sense, this case really sparked a lot of racial tension across the city. These jurors were 12 Manhattanites. They were told not to watch news coverage. We have to assume that they followed the judge's instructions, but they've lived through the aftermath. Most of them probably took the subway. How much do you think that played a role in their decision making?
I think, unfortunately, you hit a really great point that we cannot really divorce ourselves from our lived lives. And so when people are on you go on to a subway and you see what happens on a subway, it's really difficult to ask a juror to not consider any of those things. And really, you're asking them to look only at the specifics of this case. I think it's unfortunate that it becomes a racially tinged case. I think part of it was the delay in arresting Mr. Penny in the first place and the way that the police handled his interviews in the beginning. Right. And I think that sometimes it may even be done properly, but the impression that the public gets may be something other than that. And I think that I just would caution that without having all of the details, it's very difficult for us to sit in the role of a juror. So we get a chance to see what we see on television, which is a snippet of the entire case. We don't get to hear how the jurors received the actual evidence, how people testified, what was said, what wasn't said. And all of that's very important when it comes down to whether you're able to find somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
And
again, that's
points.
Separate from a civil case. A civil case has a very different burden. This is the highest burden imposed by law.
Mayo Bartlett, thank you so much. Excellent insight. We want to go back out live now to the courthouse. Alice Gaynor is joining Tim McNicholas. Alice just came out from the courtroom. Tim, is Alice there with you? I would love to hear what she has to say about the reaction when that verdict was read.
Absolutely, Jessica. She is here right now. You were in, it's been about 15 minutes now since that verdict was read. What was it like in that courtroom?
You know, it all happened so quickly because, of course, on Friday we were waiting all day. They sent those notes. They were deadlocked. So it was assumed that today would be another long day in the courtroom. But they came back pretty quickly with that note. Once the judge had instructed them to go begin deliberating on that lesser charge, they sent the note sometime after 11 o'clock this morning. The judge brought the jury back in, said, "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood up and said, "Yes, we have." And then the clerk was asking, what is your verdict? And on count 2, criminally negligent homicide, she said she paused a little bit, the jury foreperson, and said, "Not guilty." And from that moment on, it was chaos in the courtroom. Tim, I can't tell you the last time I sat in a courtroom and heard such a reaction like that when a verdict was read. There were people cheering, borderline screaming applause, but then you had other people, Jordan Neely's family, very upset. His father actually had to leave the courtroom because he stood up and he was swearing. One of the activists who's normally out here demonstrating in the morning stood up and sort of yelled what seemed to have been maybe a threat at Mr. Penny, saying, "It's a small world, buddy." I don't know if Mr. Penny heard him. As for Daniel Penny's reaction when that verdict was read, I was sitting behind the defense table. He normally sits there staring straight ahead. he turned his head a little bit for the first time that I noticed, and he seemed to be smiling. His two attorneys hugged each other, and they got up. They were escorted out of here pretty quickly. My understanding is that Daniel Penny, neither him nor his attorneys stopped to speak to cameras. They left. This jury, Tim, is anonymous. We all want to know what was going on in that jury room, but we may not hear from them. It's going to be up to them. We don't know their names for their protection. The parties know their names. We know very little information about them, and it's believed they might be getting out of here just as quickly, but we'll see. They might want to talk about this. Obviously, they deliberated for more than 20 hours. We know last week they were stuck, but today, not sure what got them over the hurdle and got them to all agree unanimously, because again, all 12 had to agree unanimously, but they came to that verdict this morning on the lesser charge. If he had been convicted, he was facing up to 4 years behind bars, but again, the jury acquitted him. And you can hear the demonstrators behind us right now. We could hear them up on the 13th floor, and defense attorneys this morning, Tim, they were pretty upset about that. Not the first time. They were worried that during deliberations, the jury could hear demonstrators, some of the phrases they heard, calling him a subway strangler, quote, a murderer, and the judge heard this too. So he said one thing they could do is potentially move the jury to a quieter room. The judge could instruct them, ignore what you're hearing. Defense ultimately decided they didn't want to draw attention to that. But then a short time later, they came back to that verdict. And so now this trial has come to a close.
So the people who were applauding when the verdict was read, were those relatives of Penny's? Were they just supporters in the courtroom? Do you have a sense of who those people were?
It was a lot of members of the public. This trial has drawn a lot of interest from the public. There's been a long line in the hallway every day for people trying to get in and get a seat. There's about 3 or 4 rows of the public typically in there, and you can't tell who they're there to support, if they're just there to observe. But today it was so loud. I mean, almost jarring in a way how loud. And court officers, of course, wanting to keep order. They've been keeping very strict rules this entire trial. They were yelling at people, quiet, be quiet. I mean, screaming. Again, I've never heard a reaction like this, and some people were asked to leave the courtroom. Some people very upset. As for Penny, you mentioned, does he have family there? His mother testified, his sister testified, but that second row behind the defense, which is reserved for family and friends, there's been no one here for him. We don't know why. It could be a safety reason. We're not sure. Jordan Neely's father has been here. His uncle has been here. They were here today. I couldn't see his uncle's reaction. They might be speaking to cameras, and as soon as they do, of course, we're gonna bring that to you.
And the defense, they actually sought for the second time now. They sought a mistrial this morning, right?
That's right. I lost track. I think about twice today they actually asked for a mistrial.
Oh, wow.
One of them reasons being that demonstrators could be heard saying these phrases, and another time earlier this morning, because of the judge's instruction last week, they didn't think that what happened was legal, where they just dismissed that. They're in my ear. We're going to send it back to the studio. I believe there's a news conference going on.
Alice, thank you so much. And we are going to take you live back out to the courtroom, outside the courthouse. Dante Mills, one of the prosecutors, is speaking outside the criminal courtroom, surrounded by Neely's family. Let's listen in here.
Our call to action is to take care of each other. We can't rely on outside people. If we see someone asking for food, we have to take the responsibility to give it to them. If we see someone cold, to give them a coat. If we see someone going through something, to ask them if they're okay. That's how we help each other, because we can't rely on the system to do it for us. And clearly, if we get to this point, it's too late. We have to be there for each other, and that's our call to action. Everybody that's pissed off at this verdict, I challenge you to go outside today and help one person. That's my challenge. If you're angry, if you're hurt, go help one person. That's how we beat the system. That's how we turn this around, by being there for each other.
Right on.
I just want to say, I miss my son. My son didn't have to go through this. I didn't have to go through this either. It hurts. It really, really hurts. What are we going to do, people? What's going to happen to us now? I had enough of this. The system is rigged. Come on, people. Let's do something about this.
Let's do something about it. Too often. We have Eric Garner's mother here. There's too often this is happening where we're left alone in this society. We got to stop that. We have to change how we impact each other. Jordan came on that subway car. The first thing he asked for was food, and he was killed. And the person who killed him was not held responsible. We cannot allow this to keep happening.
I got you. Oh. Look like the police are attacking protesters.
Good morning, everyone. Here we stand once again in front of this unjust system. I stood here 10 years ago because they did not give justice to my son with the chokehold. I fought hard to get the anti-chokehold bill passed, which did pass. But it shouldn't only be for police officers, it should be for civilians also. No one deserves to be choked to death. No one. And you know, we're in that courtroom and people are cheering for the verdict. They made the loudest noise, the judge did nothing. But when his father spoke out, they put him out the courtroom. Is that justice? Or what? We can't allow this to keep going on. We have to fight this system. That's what I had to do. I had to fight to get the little justice that I got. I got one police officer fired. There's more that need to be fired. But I tell this family, do not give up. Because that's what they want you to do. They want to discourage you. Just like they tried to discourage me. But 10 years later, I'm still fighting. And I'm not only fighting for myself, I'm fighting for families like yourself. That's why I have to come out when this injustice is done. If this had been the other way, if your family had murdered this so-called innocent guy now, it would have been a different story. He would have been in jail or would have never came out. But they don't do the same to us. It's two justice systems.
You know that.
And we have to stop this. And the only way that we can stop it is to stand together. Those of us who are against what happened, we have to speak up. We can't treat this just like another news story, not another press conference. We have to speak out, speak up, and stand up. So I just say today, we did not get justice once again. And I am saddened. I am truly saddened by this situation because it keeps on happening and no one is standing accountable for their actions. So that means that any civilian could get on the train if they feel threatened and they could choke someone out and they're going to get found not guilty, just like today. This sets a precedent. And we can't let this happen. If the police can't do it, the civilians can't do it either. And I just want you to stand with this family. This family needs you right now.
Right on. Thank you. Let me jump on there. Thank you. I'm sorry to Dre. I'm sorry to Chris. I'm sorry that America has failed you. You've come here, you've shown discipline, you've shown strength, you've shown love, you've shown how to carry yourself with composure when you're facing this machine, this American judicial system that cannibalizes our people. But I'm gonna tell you this, and I'm gonna say it loud and clear. Let the marchers march and let the steppers step. Let the marchers march and let the steppers step. You want to do something about this verdict? Then you go into your neighborhood and you promote black unity. Black people, we are all we have. This system protects every other group except for the very people that built this country.
Say it.
Every group that comes here gets privileges, gets benefits, except for the very people whose fingerprints are on the bricks that built this country. There is no love for black people. There is no love in the system. How can you make a moral appeal to a people that have no moral code? How can you preach love to racists? That got Dr. King killed. How can you promote love to a nation that is built on theft and genocide?
That's right.
What we preach is unity, black unity. Stop begging this system to justify our lives. Stop begging this system for justice. When things happen to you, you step up and defend your
Hearing reaction here to the not guilty verdict for Daniel Penny in the subway chokehold death of Jordan Neely. This has been special breaking news coverage of the Daniel Penny verdict. Much more to come. I'm Jessica Moore. We'll continue our coverage, including what happens next, right now on CBS News New York at noon.
This is CBS News New York.
Two big breaking stories right now at noon. A person of interest being questioned in Pennsylvania in connection with the murder of healthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
And a verdict in the subway chokehold trial. Daniel Penny found not guilty of criminally negligent homicide in the death of Jordan Neely. Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Hsu.
And I'm Jessica Moore, now on air and streaming on CBS News New York.
We're going to have much more on that not guilty verdict in the subway chokehold trial. First, though, CBS News New York has confirmed a person is being questioned in Pennsylvania in connection to the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
Natalie Duddridge has been on this story all morning and since it happened last week. She's live today in Central Park, where authorities have been searching for clues this weekend. Natalie, what do we know about the developments coming out of Pennsylvania this morning?
Good afternoon, Cindy, Jessica. So we are just learning in the last couple of minutes here from a high-ranking police source that a person of interest is being questioned now in Altoona, Pennsylvania. That person found, we are told from those sources, had a weapon with a silencer on them. As well, they had a fake New Jersey ID. And I'll get to why those details are so important in a moment. But also, I want to explain why we're here in Central Park. Behind us right now, there is an active police investigation underway here. Scuba teams have been searching the water here for a weapon. Now, why is that weapon with the silencer found on that person in Altoona, Pennsylvania so important? Well, if you recall, the surveillance video taken of the person Wednesday morning, we are pausing that surveillance video, shows them holding a gun with a silencer. Now, it's also very important to point out that we do not know if that weapon found indeed is involved in the shooting itself. Now, also important to note that when a person of interest was traced to a hostel on the Upper West Side, that person checked in with a fake New Jersey ID. And so again, police questioning a person of interest in Altoona, Pennsylvania at this hour, who both had a gun with a silencer as well as a fake New Jersey ID. I also want to draw you back here to Central Park. This morning, since 9 o'clock, scuba teams, they have been focused on the bottom of the lake. This is behind the Bethesda fountain. They have been working slowly in a grid-like pattern, looking for that weapon. This is a possible dumping ground police have been looking for. Nearby, NYPD K-9 units also combing wooded areas in Central Park, looking again for a possible weapon. So again, important to note, the weapon found this morning, not certain if it is connected to the shooting of 50-year-old UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Sources telling us as well that the last location a person of interest was seen, that was at the Port Authority bus terminal. That was just 45 minutes after Thompson was shot. Police sources say NYPD, U.S. Marshals, they have been canvassing Greyhound bus route stops between Atlanta and New York to determine where he boarded. Investigators, again, continuing to search for the weapon for the last several days throughout the weekend. Why that's so important? Because the weapon could provide information on where it was purchased and who owned that gun. Again, and we've been watching the latest images of the person this weekend released in the backseat of a taxi, also outside of a taxi cab. Both times in those cases wearing a mask, but also the most telling images we have seen a person without a mask taken inside an Upper West Side hostel. And again, inside that hostel is where a person used a fake New Jersey ID to check in. So again, this person has been traveling, walking around the streets of New York City, believed to have departed New York City, and police sources are saying they are now questioning a person of interest in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Once again, also, a $50,000 reward from the FBI has been placed around the city, and they had been urging members of the public to help bring this case to a close. And that's the latest, and we'll continue to bring you the very latest details. We're live here from Central Park. Back to you guys in the newsroom.
All right, Natalie, thank you so much. More breaking news this noon. A verdict reached in the Daniel Penny subway chokehold trial.
The Marine veteran accused in the death of Jordan Neely has been found not guilty of criminally negligent homicide. Alice Gaynor is live from outside Manhattan Criminal Court, has been covering this case from the very beginning. Alice, what's the latest you're hearing?
Well, in the courtroom when that verdict was read, there was an extremely loud reaction. I can't remember another trial I've covered where there was such a reaction. Typically, the judge reminds people to keep things to themselves and stay quiet, but there was no such reminder. And when the foreperson was asked what the verdict was, she paused a moment and said, "Not guilty." Thunderous, loud applause. You had members of Jordan Neely's family very upset, also yelling out. Jordan Neely's father was asked to leave the courtroom. There was some swearing going on. One activist who has been outside demonstrating every morning was inside and yelled something at Penny like, "It's a small world, buddy." We saw Daniel Penny slightly turn his head where I saw a slight smile. Normally he stares straight forward and we can't see much of a reaction from him at all. His two attorneys, his two defense attorneys, hugged each other, smiling. They left the courtroom, and we're told they left the courthouse pretty quickly. His attorneys and Daniel Penny not stopping to speak with cameras. We know a short time ago Jordan Neely's family did stop and speak. They are very upset with this verdict. It came rather quickly this morning. You may remember on Friday, prosecutors moved to dismiss the top charge after the jury had been deadlocked on that first count, which was manslaughter in the second degree. So the judge granted it. That count was tossed out on Friday, and today they were to begin their deliberations anew this morning on the lesser charge of criminally negligent homicide. That, if convicted, was carrying a sentence of up to 4 years. But again, the jury in the case, in the trial of Daniel Penny, voted to acquit him. Cindy, Jessica?
Protests have been this common thread running throughout the course of the trial. Your notes have been meticulous. Today, the protest again evoked motions from the defense and the prosecutors. There was this ongoing argument about how much of an impact those protests might have on the jury. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Right, Jessica. You know, last week, defense attorneys brought this up as well. They were concerned that the jury in their room could potentially hear some of what the demonstrators were saying out here. They have megaphones, these bullhorns, and the defense today said that they heard these demonstrators chanting things like, quote, "murderer," quote, "subway strangler," and the judge agreed. He heard it as well. But he's also been instructing the jury this entire trial to ignore things they may hear. Definitely don't read, obviously, any press reports. So he offered today to, again, remind them of this, or potentially take the steps to try and find a quieter room for the jury to go to. The defense declined this. They didn't want to draw any more attention to it. At one point, I was by a window and I heard some pro-Penny demonstrators cheering free Penny. So we heard from a lot of people on both sides outside today. And the problem is the courtroom is so hot. This is an old building, so they have the windows cracked. If they don't crack those windows, there just won't be any air in there. So that's also why we can hear these demonstrators day after day. But as the judge noted, it's usually just in the morning as Daniel Penny arrives, and then they typically quiet down for the rest of the day. So it hasn't been too much of a problem, the judge noted.
Alice, you have been covering this case from the very beginning, along with a team of our reporters. What was your reaction? Because I heard you say earlier that you expected it to go longer, especially since they were deadlocked on the first charge.
So they began their deliberations last Tuesday afternoon, and they came in on Wednesday when normally they don't sit on Wednesdays. They were here Thursday. Friday, they sent those two notes saying they were deadlocked, hopelessly deadlocked, that they just could not come to a unanimous decision. It appeared to be very frustrating. So we thought that once they started the deliberations on the lesser charge today, because we don't know how their deliberations, what order they were doing things in last week, but they were instructed to deliberate first on count one. That would have dictated if they moved on to count two. But again, that count one of manslaughter in the second degree was dismissed. So today was supposed to start fresh minds, open minds, completely new. But they came in with a note just after 11 a.m. and they only started deliberating probably sometime around 10 a.m. this morning.
And we don't know at this point whether any jury members are going to talk to the press.
We don't, Cindy. You know, they're an anonymous jury for their protection. We don't know their names. The parties know their names because during jury selection, that's how they were able to pull up some people's social media and question them about their different views. We know very limited information about a lot of them. We know that it's 7 women, 5 men. Obviously, I can see them every day, and you have to give them a lot of credit. As I've noted in previous reporting, they've had poker faces this entire trial. A lot of those autopsy photos that were displayed were really hard to look at, and to their credit, I never saw anyone look away. I never saw anyone flinch. It's believed they might have gone out the back of the courthouse. We do have a photographer there, so if they want to talk, that is completely up to them. So we're just going to have to wait and see.
All right, Alice Gaynor live in Lower Manhattan. Alice, thank you.
Joining us now to talk more about the verdict is James Sample, Hofstra University law professor. James, good to see you as always. Were you surprised with how quickly the jury came to a decision this morning after being twice deadlocked on that top count of manslaughter on Friday?
Well, Jessica and Cindy, it's good to be with you as always. I was surprised at the pace of today's deliberations, especially relative to last week, and certainly relative to what appeared to have been a hung jury on the primary charge, the first charge, if in fact the prosecutors had decided to press ahead with that rather than to dismiss it. So it seems as though the jury would have, I mean, if the district attorney had tried to go for a hung jury, had insisted on that top charge, they probably would have had a hung jury and then at least the possibility of retrying this case. So to then proceed to today and to reach a verdict that quickly on the lesser charge is certainly a huge, huge victory for Mr. Penny. It's a huge defeat, a staggering loss for the district attorney's office, and many people questioned whether to even bring this case. But I guess my overall reaction today is very similar to what Alice was just reporting, actually, which is to say this case was a judgment call all along. It was a question of how much force was Mr. Penny allowed to use on Mr. Neely. And I'm glad that it was clear ex ante from the beginning that no matter what the verdict was, a lot of people were going to be angry. I'm glad that the jury made the judgment call, because this case was ultimately a matter of a judgment call, a line drawing exercise. How much force was appropriate? How much force was excessive? And I'm glad, whatever the verdict, whatever the frustrations, one of the things that we can rely on in this system of justice that we have, however imperfect, is that if the process is fair and a jury of one's peers is about as fair, though imperfect, as systems get, then we can at least learn to accept the results and move on, whatever our perspective.
So let's talk about what happens next. This isn't over. Jordan Neely's father is bringing a civil case. Let's talk about next steps.
Well, certainly, Cindy, because the criminal case, there's no more trial. You don't get to appeal an acquittal. So the criminal case is over. But you're right that the pivot now will be to the civil case. Jordan Neely's father just last week, in fact, while the jury was deliberating, filed that civil lawsuit. And certainly that will take a lot of time to play out. There will be incentives to consider settlement offers, to make that go away. And a lot of people don't want to sit through another trial, but very different standards in the civil context as opposed to the criminal context, where as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt, for example, a civil lawsuit only needs to be proven by a preponderance of the evidence that Mr. Neely's death was caused by Mr. Penny.
Going back to Friday, when the jury came back twice saying we just cannot reach a unanimous verdict on this manslaughter charge, prosecutors then moved to drop that top charge. The defense called for a mistrial, right? They're saying this is tampering with the jury's mindset. Was that ultimately up to the judge whether to grant that motion? And why do you think he was willing to say, let's drop the top charge, see if they can come to a unanimous verdict on this second charge?
It's a great question, Jessica, and I think to a certain degree, any answer that we would offer is speculative, to be candid. But I think that there was strategic posturing on both sides and a difficult strategic decision for the judge. I mean, the prosecutors were willing to drop the top charge because they essentially had a plan B, a backup option. The defense, rightly, was arguing that, well, if the jury instructions in this case, when it initially went to the jury, said that if you can't reach a verdict, that you can only consider the negligent homicide if you reached a verdict first on the manslaughter charge. And in that case, the verdict would have been an acquittal on manslaughter, because if you had convicted on manslaughter, you don't get to the charge. And so to be deadlocked on that first charge, the prosecutors were saying, well, we've got this backup option. The defense is essentially saying, no, you're trying to give the jury a way out to still hold Mr. Penny culpable when you, in fact, overcharged the case. The judge was in a very tough spot because you didn't have a conviction and you didn't have an acquittal. And so then the question became what to do with the opportunity to consider the second charge or not. If today's decision had been a conviction on that second charge, Mr. Penny would have had a very strong case on appeal that the judge's instruction was improper. But now that goes away.
And Professor, going back to the civil case from Jordan Neely's father, so basically you're saying that the thing that needs to be proven is that he caused the death, is that Daniel Penny caused Jordan Neely's death. Is that correct?
And that he did so negligently, not just that he caused the death, but that his death was that Mr. Penny's negligence at a minimum caused his death. Now, you can establish that but for Mr. Penny's chokehold, Mr. Neely probably would not have died on that subway train, but that's not enough. It needs to be, and if I said it was just proving that it was, then that's a misstatement on my part. To be clear, to prevail in the civil case, Mr. Neely's family will need to prove that Mr. Penny's negligence caused Mr. Neely's death.
Got it. James Sample, thank you so much for your expert insight, as always. Good to have you.
And our coverage continues of both of these breaking news stories, a verdict in the Daniel Penny trial and a person being held for questioning in the death of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. We'll be right back after a quick break.
We want to go back to the latest updates on the United CEO murder. We've learned a suspect is being questioned in Altoona, Pennsylvania, in connection with that shooting.
Joining us now to talk more about the search is CBS law enforcement contributor Rich Esposito. Rich, thank you so much for joining us. What do you know about this person of interest that they're talking with?
I think it's important that we call him a person of interest at this time because that's exactly what the person is. It is a male who has been brought in by police in Pennsylvania, who has been described as carrying false ID and a similar kind of gun. So obviously those things all by themselves are immediately interesting. And now they're doing the forensics to see if it is in fact the same person.
Rich, I'm curious, excuse me. So over the weekend, investigators had focused their search. We had the new information from police sources, NYPD, U.S. Marshals. They're in Atlanta, around Atlanta, searching there. The thought was perhaps the person of interest had taken the bus from the George Washington bus terminal down to Atlanta. We knew he had come from Atlanta. They also said they had U.S. Marshals stationed at various bus stops between New York and Atlanta. How do we end up in Pennsylvania?
Well, that's always a good question. So they actually were fairly careful to say they were checking all the stops from that terminal to Atlanta and back. That bus terminal takes you through New Jersey. Pennsylvania is right on the other side of New Jersey. Was not out of their range of searching. They were just being very methodical in what they were saying, if that's helpful.
No, it is. It is.
And Rich, I know we know so little right now about this person of interest or even a name for an alleged suspect. But from what you are hearing, how are you leaning as far as if this person may or may not have been involved in this case?
I'm not leaning. I am waiting to see what the information is that they get in Pennsylvania. They're going to be very careful. The police in Pennsylvania are going to be very careful. New York is going to send someone to Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, fingerprints are going to get sent to the database. The marshals will have someone close by in Pennsylvania. They'll move their person there. And obviously, the FBI has a task force there. And they're going to see if this person is known to them for other reasons. Perhaps it's not the person, but who is this guy with false New Jersey ID and a weapon?
All right, Rich Esposito, thank you so much for all of that information, and we'll be calling on you later today. I can rest assured of that. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, guys.
And we're going to be staying on top of this story as the manhunt continues. We have a crew on the way to Altoona, and we'll have updates streaming online and later today beginning at 5.
Another update now in the verdict in the subway chokehold death. Daniel Penny found not guilty. Jordan Neely's family just reacted to that verdict outside the courthouse. Let's listen to what they had to say.
I miss my son. My son didn't have to go through this. I didn't have to go through this either. It hurts. It really, really hurts. What are we gonna do, people? What's going to happen to us now? I had enough of this. The system is rigged. Come on, people. Let's do something about this.
Jordan Neely's father there reacting to the verdict. We'll have a lot more on the trial and the verdict, including a timeline of the case on CBSNewYork.com, and of course, a full wrap-up tonight beginning at 5.
Just ahead on CBS News New York, going to be a rainy afternoon.
And that's not all for the week. Tony times it out in his complete forecast when we come back.